Hello and welcome to the Go to Martech podcast. I'm excited to welcome Evan Wray to the pod today. Evan, thanks so much for joining us. How are you doing?
Yeah, excited to be here, Jacob. Doing wonderful. I'm a big fan of what you guys are doing, and excited to be on. Thanks for having me.
Awesome. No problem. Well, I know it's a busy time for you, for Mavely. Thanks for taking the time out of your day to join us. Do you want to start by just giving us a brief introduction on yourself, maybe a little bit about Mavely, although we'll delve into that later, just for listeners that aren't aware of you and the company?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I'll tee it up. So my background. So I'm the co-founder and CEO of Mavely. We've coined ourselves as the everyday influencer platform, which I'll talk about in a little bit here, I'm sure. But I don't know. The background on me is, and I don't know if this is a good background or a crazy background, but I founded my first company in college, and it ended up being a company called Swift Media that part luck, part skill ended up becoming one of the first emoji ad networks. And we scaled that to a pretty decent sized company, ultimately exited it in 2015. And that was my first foray into entrepreneurship and fundraising and building companies and culture and launching tech products. And from there, myself and my co-founder just started to think about, what do we want to do next? What gets us excited? Where's the world going? And with that, we were talking to a lot of brands and seeing how people were trying to reach consumers in a new way. Facebook wasn't as effective as it used to be. Google search ads weren't as effective as they used to be. It seemed like it was getting more and more crowded, harder and harder, more expensive to reach customers. And this was back in 2018, so it's just gotten worse here, right? And so myself and my co-founder started thinking, like, okay, well, how are we going to do this? And around that time, influencers weren't new, but they were, I think, starting to be taken seriously, or had the potential maybe to be taken seriously. And our thought was, there's a lot of people in the world, there's a lot of people coming online, more and more users of social media. The gig economy was just starting, right? So Uber was starting to take off. People wanted to have a side hustle, and the thought was, well, let's just get a lot of everyday people, or what we have ultimately coined everyday influencers, and empower them to make recommendations on their favorite products or services at scale across all their favorite social networks. And that was kind of the initial idea. And we took that and ran with it and raised some money on it, and kind of have had the roller coaster ride as always. But right now we're in a pretty nice spot, doing over 700 or almost 700 million in gross merchandise volume powered through our influencers. The team is knocking on the door of 100 people. It's fun. We work with over 1,200 of the top brands. So like, kind of think of the world's biggest brands, they likely work with Mavely, and all around this everyday influencer. So it's been a fun journey so far, and excited to talk about a little bit more here.
Yeah, absolutely, man. Thanks so much. And it's funny, it's becoming a common theme. This isn't intentional with guests on our pod who are CEOs, who are founders, about them starting some sort of business sort of at college.
Yeah, yeah.
So yeah, there's obviously something within the characteristic of a startup founder CEO where that's just in your blood from the early days. So did you always feel like that, like sort of growing up and being a
Yeah.
young guy, or?
Yeah, it's a super good question. I think so. I guess so. My father was an entrepreneur. It was different type though. So he actually just had a small architecture firm in Dayton, Ohio, which is where I'm from originally. So I think probably I saw him, go into his office. I think there was, 5 or 6 people in the office. So I saw him do that from a very young age. So I would say that definitely probably I was drinking the Kool-Aid a little early there. But yeah, I mean, it's so my view on entrepreneurship generally is that one of the coolest abilities that everyone has, if they choose to do it, is to take an idea that's in your head, and then galvanize people around the mission, galvanize resources around it, raise money, do the business development, hire teams, put code down, like build products. And at the end of the day, you're going to wake up in 2 or 3 years, and that thing that was just an idea in your head is now a real, like, living, organism. It's serving people. And I think that's just frankly, like a superpower that everyone has to take, make something out of nothing, out of an idea. And I think probably why you're seeing a lot of people or a lot of entrepreneurs in college do it is, that's a pretty creative time in your life, I'd say. And it's also very relatively low risk relative to, you're likely not married, you likely don't have kids, you likely don't have a house or a mortgage payment or car payments or like this thing called life. So you can take a bit of a flyer. And it's funny, like now, I graduated college now, 12 years ago, and feels like some days it feels further away and some days it feels closer. But what's so neat about that is, I think now as a founder and a CEO and making a lot of hiring decisions, and I've hired hundreds of people over my career so far, and I actually have a lean now towards people who have taken a chance and have regardless of if it worked or not, right? Regardless of if it was successful or not, but they've taken a chance, they've taken an idea from ideation to execution to building and maybe scaling, maybe not, but like the learnings that you get from that are now really, really compelling and desired for me as an employer to say, oh, you have grit, you have initiative, you have self-sufficiency, you can critically think. And so I'm a huge proponent whenever I talk to potential entrepreneurs, especially people just getting started in their careers or at at college or in high school, is like, lean into that, like try it. And the worst thing that happens is it doesn't work, and you learn so much, and you're way more qualified for whatever you're going to do in life. Like, that's the worst case scenario, in my opinion. So maybe that's why you start to see a lot of entrepreneurs start in college. But yeah, it's a super fun time. It's a creative time.
Yeah, no, absolutely. That's so interesting. I love that your dad was also an entrepreneur, and that you sort of saw that from a young age, right? That's pretty inspirational. So yeah, the one thing I would say though, the common theme that we do not have is that those CEOs and founders who founding something in college, that they were not necessarily successful because that's relatively normal, right? So you're the outlier right now on Evan.
Yeah, well, it's a learning though, right? And I think I think what, especially in like today's, I don't know, like lifting up of tech entrepreneurs and founders in general, it's easy to read a TechCrunch article to say XYZ founder raised a ton of money and then sold for a ton of money, and it happens overnight, and you see everyone's doing it, right? And the reality is that entrepreneurship and startups in particular, they're like an at-bat game, if you will, right? So what I've seen, at least in my career, and what I've seen from a lot of my friends who have been successful in the tech space, is it's about how quickly can you iterate, how quickly can you have these learnings, how quickly can you take that idea we were talking about earlier that's in your head, make it a real tangible thing that you can get out and test. And it doesn't have to be like a huge dog and pony show with with a big marketing budget and raising a ton of venture. It just needs to be like, walk around campus or walk around your town or walk into businesses and just ask people questions, get feedback on it. And the quicker you can get that feedback loop, the more, I call it, like, at bats you have before you run out of time or money as an entrepreneur. So, and that feedback loop allows you to make these small changes and get better and better and better. So I think one of the biggest and most important things in being an entrepreneur is having like the curiosity and the willingness to ask and the willingness to be wrong and take that feedback and tweak for the better, whatever your product or service is.
Yeah, great points. And I think that feedback loop thing is something that I've heard about recently from some folk who advocate for like revenue leaders to come in even pre-product at some points or in some situations, and actually be the person that's out there speaking to potential customers, getting that feedback to help inform product founders, etc. So it was interesting you brought that up as well.
Yeah, it's a huge thing. I mean, so and I think it also, my opinion would be like that's the founder's job. Like, go get that feedback, because at the end of the day, you're going to be, as a founder, you're going to be driving everything. You know, the product, the culture, who you're hiring, like the setting the tone. So I would say early on, I would highly recommend that to be the founder. Like, go talk to everyone and anyone, right? Just go ask a bunch of questions. And but as you scale, that gets harder, right? So one of the things that we've implemented at Mavely, to specifically for this feedback reason, is, so at Mavely, you know, we fundamentally build software tools to help everyday influencers make money on social media. And as we've grown, you know, I used to have a lot of direct conversations with influencers, with everyday people. It's like, hey, what do you want? What do you need? What are you interested in? And that helped shape product and business decisions and partnerships that we were doing. But as the team grows and as our company grows, it's easier to get further and further removed, especially as a founder role. It's easier to get further and further removed from the frontline customer, right? From talking to the influencer. So one of the things, you know, we do at Mavely, and I highly recommend it for any company, especially in the hypergrowth stage where you're doing a lot of product iteration, is we set up twice a week, you know, quick, you know, 15, 30-minute meetings to start the day with our entire creator success team. That is the front lines of talking to all of our creators, and with our data team. They're in the same meeting. And then myself and both me and my co-founder Sean, as well as our other executives, sit in that meeting too. And the whole point of it is to get feedback like every 4 or 5 days around what is the community saying, what's the data saying from a creator's perspective, so we don't lose the pulse of the community. We don't lose that like keeping the creator first element. So it's and it's also like my most fun meetings of the week. But it's a way to keep the leadership and the founders really close to the creators, without necessarily having the conversations every single day. So something I highly recommend is, as companies grow, don't lose that touch point, which was the special magic at the beginning that made you successful.
Amazing. No, that's really interesting. I think, as you said, as companies grow, you can lose touch a little bit. You have this structure, right? Your hierarchy, and probably what your customers are saying might get watered down a little bit as you go up the hierarchy. If your CSM is talking to their manager,
Yep.
who's then talking to their VP,
Yep.
who's then talking to the CRO, who's then talking to you. Well, it's a bit like Chinese whispers, I guess. So yeah, that's amazing. That's amazing.
Yeah,
Really
the joke is that we only hear like the really bad stuff or the really good stuff, and like, the middle either doesn't make it up or it gets dulled down on the way up. So, but yeah, and I think that's where it's something that I think founders need to be purposeful about, of not losing that, because if you're not careful, you can get surrounded by in like a bubble. Frankly, like, yeah, everything is going great, or it's a yes situation, yes culture, and that ultimately, my view is like you lose the magic that got you there, which was being hungry and being customer centric and rolling your sleeves up and kind of hustling through it. So super important to set those structures up like early as you scale.
Yeah, fantastic. And from the story you just told about that, the importance of feedback when it comes to your creative community, I'm sure your brand partners too. But talk to me a bit about how you approach both the brand side and the creator side. It sounds like you're very focused on the experience.
Yeah, 100%. So I would say for Mavely, at the beginning, one of our key hypotheses was that we're going to build a creator first platform, whereas pretty much everyone else in the space, or most other people in the space, have built a brand first platform. Mm-hmm. And that was just a fundamental, it seems like kind of a basic thing, but it was a fundamental different way of building a company. And what that has manifested itself in is that the brand first companies have typically built, a fundamentally B2B business, right? A B2B pricing model, a B2B go-to-market, B2B software, B2B user experience. So that's like fundamentally what they've built. Whereas for Mavely, we've fundamentally built a B2C experience, which is, business to consumer or business to creator, and in our sense. And what we realized early on was that these creators are, they're not big businesses. They have, some of them have very big scale, but they're still individuals or small teams of folks supporting an individual. So you need a consumer experience for them to interact with. I think this is a general trend that's going to happen in a ton of B2B software for what it's worth, but we just happen to do it on the creator side. So one of the things we do to make sure we have that great experience for the creators is a couple things. We've set up an advisory council with our creators that talks directly to me and the other leaders of our team. We've got these touch points like structurally with our team and how we've organized it to actually have this creator feedback a couple times a week. And then we regularly both survey our users, and then we do something called NPS, or Net Promoter Score, of our creators. So, and it's a KPI for our business across the entire business, is what is our Net Promoter Score of our creators. And what that does two things. One, it gives us a ton of feedback from what's working and what's not, so we can double down on what's working and we can quickly change or iterate on what's not. But it also, because it's a KPI of the business, because we talk about it so much, because we've set up a bunch of different channels to get this feedback from our creators on their experience, it instills it in the entire Mavely company culture of, we're building this for creators. And the last thing on the creator side, and I'll talk about brands in a second, but the last thing we did on the creator side is, so Mavely is we're Chicago based. About 25% of our team is actually in Chicago. The rest is remote across the US. And what we do every year is we do something called Mavely Week. So we fly our entire team into Chicago in the summer, right? So when it's nice. And we get everyone together. We do team building. We do strategy sessions, all hands, all this different stuff. But one of the things that I've made a point to do every year is actually bring creators in as well, and actually hold a creator panel where it's for us internally as Mavely, and where I or someone else on our team interviews our creators to say, what's your story? Like, not too dissimilar from this, right? What's your story? How did you get into it? What were you doing beforehand? What do you like? What are the challenges you see in being a creator? And the point of that is for our whole team to see firsthand, this is who we're building for. Like this is why we're doing this. And it's been really cool, right? You have creators that say, I was a teacher. I love my job, but it was getting stressful. So I started being an influencer for teachers. And then I was actually able to move from that job over to being an influencer full time. Or I do this part time that allows me to spend more time with my kids. Or I was able to have financial freedom as I was growing with Mavely. And it makes it real for our entire team. And again, that's something that it's very, you have to be purposeful about. And we're very purposeful about on the creator side. And then on our brand side, I think we do something very similar. So Net Promoter Score is key. Having these interviews, I make a point of it's a KPI, like, incentivize what you expect and measure what you expect, right? Our team is a big in-person team. So we have over-indexed to flying in person to brands and having these conversations with them and building that relationship with them, which I think in this day and age is like a little less common for businesses to do. And 10 times out of 10, I'm always going to say sitting down with someone, shaking their hand, having a conversation, over a whiteboard or something is going to build a different relationship than just an hour Zoom meeting. So we're very, very purposeful about it on the brand side and on the creator side. And then, as we've scaled, we've also had to be purposeful about what's our team experience, what's our employee experience as well, which I can talk to. But it's as we've grown, we've had to set up these more structures and be dedicated and purposeful about what's our goal.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks so much for talking us through that. So actually, although you guys came in with a creative first mindset, I guess that, the better quality of creators that you can attract, reach, etc., that's only going to benefit the brand. So I guess it's a bit of a knock-on reaction in that way too. So it's not just
100%
focused.
Yeah, 100%. So our hypothesis is that if you build the best in class experience for creators, you're going to have the most creators, and brands are going to come, right? Because at the end of the day, where I think the creator economy generally, and especially influencer marketing dollars, are shifting is it's shifting away from the I would say like the traditional like mega influencer, and more to again the everyday influencer, right? So, and that's because they can be more authentic, they can have more niche audiences, they, at least in our experience, they have much higher conversion rates, they have lower return rates, they're more trusted per se. I think as the consumer's getting smarter and realizing that, okay, one day this influencer promotes Pepsi, the next day they promote Coke, they don't actually care about either one of them. And whereas once you get into like the niches and the everyday influencers, they personally know their followers, right? So it's a different community aspect that's being built, and that's where we're seeing a lot of brands want to tap into. We're also seeing a lot of social networks want to tap into that ethos as well, and those creators as well. And so it's like, but it's really hard to scale that as a brand unless you have a tech partner, because all of a sudden you have to have thousands, tens of thousands of one-to-one relationships, and you can't scale that to make an impact unless you have a technology that's doing it. So yeah, definitely creator focused, but at the end of the day, brands, our view, will go to the platform that has the happiest and the best creators.
Sense. And it's so interesting seeing how that's evolved from influencer marketing, as you said, with well-known sort of macro influencers, through to what we're seeing now with the buying patterns and those micro influencers having way more influence.
Yeah.
And I can see it, I see it in my workplace, but I also see it in my home with the way that my family, my friends buy. Even for me, I don't really, follow a lot of influencers or whatever, but what I realize is that folk that I follow on Instagram, for example, are now doing partnerships. And even for me, that's, it gives an extra layer of authenticity. So yeah, I can see it on multi-layers, but it's really interesting. Anyway.
Yeah. So, sorry, real quick. I would double click on that real quick, because I think it's super important. Yeah. So there's what consumers are liking. There's what brands are trying to attract, or they're trying to tap into, with that trust and authenticity. And then we call it internally the TikTok effect, right? So TikTok went the part of the whole initial appeal was anyone could go viral, right? So you didn't have to be a mega celebrity to go viral. So anyone could go viral. And what that did is it supercharged creators, and they were just creating all kinds of content, which is great for TikTok. So what's happened is the other platforms have actually shifted their algorithms more towards this anyone can go viral side, I guess, of discovery for consumers. So now all of a sudden the influencer that has 10,000 followers has a similar reach as someone who has 2 million followers, which is probably why you as a consumer are seeing more of these everyday folks and you're engaging with it more. So it's we're super bullish about where the world's going on that.
Yeah. You saw with Instagram changing algorithms or inserting the real feature as more prominent, and also YouTube Shorts, right, as well.
Yep.
So yeah, which is someone like, I don't actually have TikTok, so I'm just a bit too old probably, so I'm being influenced by Instagram and YouTube Shorts instead.
Yeah. Well, and also, I don't know if you saw, but LinkedIn just introduced vertical video with creators a couple months ago, right?
I did. I'm trying to not click into it so I don't get distracted from my day-to-day. So, Evan, you touched on this, but I want to know more about it. You talked about sort of the growth you guys have seen, and how you put employee experience at the forefront of a lot of what you guys do. So, yeah, tell me a bit about the growth that you guys have seen from an employee perspective, how you view employee experience, and just interested for our audience to understand Any advice that you have for founders who are sort of
Yeah.
building and scaling?
Yeah. No, I think it's a great question. I think so. From my perspective, it all starts with your mission, your vision, your values. So vision is like, where do you want to be in 10 years? Mission is like, what are you waking up every day to do? And values are how are you doing it every day is how I would think about that. And a lot of founders don't ever put those together until they get further down the road. And it might seem like a overly corporate exercise to do initially, but highly recommend putting together your mission, vision, and values day one with, if it's just you as a solo founder, with your co-founders, with your early team, like get it on paper day one, and then as you grow and as you scale, that becomes like this North Star, this beacon of like how you want to build your company. Because if you, as a founder, if you don't do that early, you're going to wake up 3 or 4 years into the business and you're not going to really have a cultural identity, or you're going to have a cultural identity that just sort of came to be versus being very purposeful about it. And I think founders need to be very purposeful about, how are they building their culture, and then and ultimately, what do they value? Like, and that informs org structure, that informs hiring decisions, that informs, frankly, like, are you working remote, or are you in person, or are you a hybrid, right? Like, it informs all these different organizational decisions if you have a very clear mission, vision, values. So I think that's the first thing I'd say. But as we've grown Mavely, I think one of the interesting things that me and a lot of other founders have had to navigate in this day and age is the reality of in office versus work from home versus hybrid, and the also reality that this next generation of workforce that's graduating, they in many cases have never worked in an office, right? Or have or actively choosing jobs that maybe aren't as office centric or are more flexible. And then on the other end of it is folks that are a little further in their careers, that have families, that have kids, that have these other responsibilities outside of work. They also kind of lean more like, oh, I don't really want to have my commute in an office. So what we've ultimately done is, and I think there's multiple ways to do this, and some they all can work, but we've ultimately done a hybrid approach. So we have a group of really teams, like our executive team, our marketing team, teams like that are in Chicago. They're in our office, but only 3 days a week, right? So people still have that work from home culture, that work from home experience. And then the rest of our team is remote, but we're very purposeful about getting them together. So I mentioned Mavely Week earlier. So we do that once a year. We fly everyone together, and are very purposeful about building these in-person relationships. But then we also do these micro offsites by team, right? So our entire revenue team was down in Fayetteville, Arkansas last week. I think this week our entire customer success team is in St. Louis, right? So we invest in it, and that's a purposeful decision, from me and the rest of the team to say we're going to invest in building these in-person relationships above and beyond just a Zoom meeting, and that allows people to go have lunch and talk about their kids or talk about their hobbies or whatever. And it's hard to do that with your back-to-back meetings, and it's just so quick, right? So I would say, as we've grown the business, we've been very purposeful about what's the culture we want to set with mission, vision, and values. And then how do we, invest in, fostering that and growing that. And the only last thing I'll leave it with here is that also becomes, it's very easy to say to do that. But now we're at a scale where sometimes me as the founder or the executive team thinks we're doing things right to foster, the right culture and everything. But just like we're getting feedback from our creators, and just like we're getting feedback from our brands, we've also created an environment where we can get feedback from our team, right? So I do CEO office hours open every Friday for an hour, right? Anyone can join, anyone can jump on. Doesn't matter who you are, where you are, in no agenda. You can come in and ask about my kids or tell me, something's going, the strategy's wrong, right? And there's no agenda there. We've also instituted all hands meetings for our entire team. We've doubled down on Mavely Week, right? We've instituted, we call them stay interviews. So our HR leads go around and actually talk to all the team members and say, hey, what do you like about your role? What don't you like about your role? How can we support you? How can we double down on your career aspirations? And give us the feedback on things we need to change, right? We do an internal employee, we call it an employee engagement survey, but it's an NPS of our employees, right, in our team. So I would just say, like, as companies grow and scale, especially in the hyper growth stage, founders have to be purposeful around maintaining that culture, reinforcing it, and then investing in it from a cost perspective. And that's something that I probably didn't realize initially. And then as we've grown, I've personally put a lot of time and focus on it as the leader of the business.
Well, some amazing points there. So yeah, I think there's a lot to unpick from that. I think firstly, I've seen it firsthand with startup, scale up businesses who, they might hire their first 20 to 100 people, and only at that point, at the 100 point maybe, do they go, oh, hey, actually, here's the type of people that we like.
Yep.
And they will go, and we say that because here's who's been successful on our journey so far within our business. Well, that's a good indicator, but you're sort of doing it the other way around.
Yep.
At Mavely, where you're saying, here's what our mission is, here's our set of values, here are the things that we're going to look out for when we're hiring. And you've already defined quite early on what's going to work for you when it comes to an employee-employer fit. So I think that is something that I actually genuinely, hiring for a lot of startups myself, rarely see.
Yeah. Well, tell them to do it, right? Because it's what happens is subconsciously you're going to do it anyway.
Mm-hmm.
And so as the company grows, the end result is you're kind of shaping the culture, you're kind of shaping the values, you're kind of doing it. And then you have to, like you said, go backwards and do pattern recognition and figure out, okay, well, we need people that are, collaboration or accountability or whatever it is. And so if you're intentional about it early on, it just helps you move faster, right? Like you'll interview someone that maybe has a rock star resume, interviews incredibly well, has all the skill sets, but then you talk to him like, man, I don't know if you're going to thrive in the Mavely business, right? And so it's a very clear line to be able to say, okay, well, probably you're great, wish you the best of luck, but probably not a great fit for what we're trying to build. And it allows you to avoid some of you're always going to make mistakes in hiring, especially, but it allows you to kind of avoid some of those, or when you do make a mistake, be able to identify like what was the reason, what was the why behind it.
Yeah, for sure. No, so interesting. And in terms of that hybrid approach that you guys have, it's the first time I've heard an approach like that. I feel like it's always hard to get a balance right between creating a great culture and keeping that culture going, which is why people want some sort of in-office interaction,
Yep.
right? With attracting talented people who maybe in office doesn't fit necessarily with their lives. So I think companies are always trying to think of the best way to approach that, right? And I think you guys have come up with a really interesting way of doing that. So that stood out to me as well. So some great advice. Thanks so much for talking us through
Yeah, absolutely.
these pieces.
We had a bunch of speed bumps along the road, so hopefully it helps others avoid some of those.
Yeah, that's it. And I guess like the product side of things, you're always iterating with what works from an employee and cultural perspective too.
Yeah, 100%.
Cool. Well, look, I've got now, Evan, a question from our last guest, this is a feature of each episode we do. We may have touched on some of these points already, actually, but yeah, interested to hear your sort of thoughts on this. This founder and CEO asked, how do you genuinely differentiate yourself in what is a relatively crowded marketplace? And I think the second part of that question was also, do you come into Mavely from the early days going, we know we're stepping into a crowded marketplace, here's what we need to do to differentiate, or do you sort of learn that along the way, try to pretend it's not real, and then eventually accept it and come up with something? Because I think that's a journey that maybe that person had been through as well,
Yeah.
whilst in his business.
Yeah. So for us, I think we hit on a little bit of this, but I'll go a little deeper on it. So yeah, I think the interesting thing we have right now in the influencer marketing world or the creator economy world is it's kind of a catch-all umbrella for somebody posting content on behalf of a brand or service, right? Like at the meta level, right? And the reality is a lot of brands have different goals, and there's a lot of, I would say, there isn't a huge barrier to someone starting like a traditional agency model to connect a brand with an influencer and do a campaign, right? So I think that leads to a lot of the crowdedness in it, or like the influencer marketing or creator economy. What we've been really purposeful about, I would say, really three things. And one is, like I mentioned before, we fundamentally have built creator first, and that's, again, it sounds obvious, but most platforms in the space have not done that, right? So what ends up happening is their business models are fundamentally different, right? You have a lot of SaaS based business models in the influencer space, whereas we have no SaaS component at all to our business, right? We've been very, very, very creator first has been the big one. And specifically, kind of to double down on that is, maybe it's really 4 points instead of three, but we've been everyday influencer focused, right? So, and this is something that's not that we just realized, oh, the market's going that way. We actually trademarked it years ago, the everyday influencer, and have doubled and tripled down on saying, there are platforms where you can only, join or get accepted if you look a certain way, right? Or you have a certain following or whatever it is. And Mavely's taken the opposite approach. She's like, the 1% influencers, can and do use Mavely, and we're really excited for them to use it. But we also focus on the other 99% of influencers, and then that scale there. So I'd say creator first, that everyday influencer focus. Those are two things that might be obvious, but not many people are doing. And then I would say the other big thing that we've done is very early on, one of my core theses of Mavely is that traditionally as a market and as a digital market evolves, it goes from branding based spend to performance based spend. So I use the example Snapchat, as they first started monetizing that platform. They had a $750,000, 24-hour takeover of Snapchat was their first ad unit, right? And it was a branding ad unit. Fast forward a decade, and it's almost all direct response. It's all performance based. So the insight that we had early on was we believe that influencer marketing is going to do the same thing. It's going to start branding, but ultimately it's going to go to performance and direct response. So from day one, we built our platform to be performance based, right? So when we interact with a brand, it's not, hey, give us, $100,000 and we'll give you a bunch of cool content and likes and engagements. It's give us $100,000. We'll give you all that stuff, but we're also going to drive $500,000 in tangible sales from our influencers that we report back on you, and we can tell you who drove what and why they drove it. And now you can double and triple down. So it's that we call it performance-based influencer marketing. And so for us, it's been this combination of best-in-class creator experience, targeting the everyday influencer, the everyday creator, and then doing it in a performance-based way for brands. That's been a very unique approach in the space. And what we're seeing is more and more CMOs are challenging their influencer teams. They're challenging their marketing teams to say, okay, I just gave you a large influencer budget. What was the result in sales? And the reality is most providers can't answer that question. So we're seeing a lot of shift to Mavely as a result of that. So I would say those are my three things, and I'm sure my team will have a dozen more.
No, I love that. I think firstly, for somebody like me who's outside of the business, who isn't involved every day in the influencer marketing world, that all made sense. I could see why that was valuable, those three things that you said, and I think that's usually a sign of something really positive when it comes to use case. If somebody can easily understand it, who doesn't have a good grasp on the world, then that is firstly a great sign. I think secondly, the companies that I work with who are in crowded spaces where they do really need to define themselves and stick their sort of spear in the ground and say, hey, this is what we're good at. They don't just do that with one element. They do that with maybe 1, 2, or 3 elements, as you just gave examples of, which all coincide nicely with each other. And I think that is what makes companies sort of win, right? Is when they can really define that, but they don't just have one thing. It's like, here are the 3 things that we really focus on being the best at. And here's why they all fit nicely together. And that is where you see companies, I guess take the edge away from others. But cool. Well, that is a great way to end the podcast. Evan, thank you so much for joining us. It's been a true pleasure having you on.
Yeah, well, thank you so much for having me. I really enjoyed talking to you, Jacob, and I will continue to be a big listener in the future.
Yeah, absolutely. And maybe 12 months time, come back, tell us what you learned, what you've changed. We can maybe do that too.
Let's do it. That would be great.
Cool. Thanks so much.